What if stories are the higher beings? What if they are the higher intelligence and actually use our consciousness and our bodies to bring themselves to life?
So if no one believes your story, then it's worth nothing. If enough people believe your story, then it could be the most powerful thing on earth.
All right. So what's up, guys? I'm your host, Noah.
And I'm your host, Zach.
And this is the Big Chew Podcast. We give you big info to chew on, but in bite-sized pieces. This way you don't have to listen to all the mumbo jumbo and fluff that we carefully took out for you. Get ready to chow down and knowledge up. Let's begin the Big Chew Podcast.
All right. So first off, this is going to be, we're covering Lex Fridman Podcast, where he's interviewing Yuval Noah Harari. Am I saying that right?
Harari.
Now, he is an historian, a philosopher, and a best-selling author of Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and the series Sapiens, which is a graphic history and unstoppable U.S. Is that us or U.S.?
Yeah, so a graphic history and unstoppable us.
That makes sense. His books have sold over 45 million copies in 65 languages, and he is considered one of the world's most influential public intellectuals today.
Right. So to get into this, Zach, what were your overall thoughts about this pod?
I think it's super interesting that, of course, he's a historian by nature, but that has turned into like a philosopher of our time to kind of connect all of human history that we know of to today, and based off what we know, how to look at it and make decisions today. And I think that that's a very important perspective to hear from. I think what he has to say and how he looks at things, a lot of us humans, I think I would agree, just need to be thinking at least of those as options. You get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
there's just a lot there.
Well, yeah, you know the old saying, it's if you don't know your history, it's doomed to repeat itself.
Right.
And so he talks about that. And yes, we do talk about AI a good bit on this podcast, only because it's very, very relevant. And he compares, like Zach said, past instances with new technologies and what that meant, and all the things that happen when those new technologies are implemented, and what this could potentially mean for ours. Because this is computers and the internet. We experienced that, and now the new one is AI, and we're going to get to that. And there's a lot of other things: history, consciousness, intelligence, suffering, all that other good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, anything else you want to add, or you want to just dive in?
I think we should dive in.
Yeah, so now Yuval thinks intelligence is overvalued because it can be self-destructive. So intelligence and consciousness are very vastly different. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like love and hate and pain. Intelligence is the ability to problem solve. Harari thinks consciousness is much more valuable.
Yeah, so an example of high intelligence without consciousness is computers. AI is another great example. As far as we know, plants aren't conscious, but they do have intelligence.
Now, can computers ever become conscious without being organic? The jury is still out on that.
Could happen. Yuval says aliens, because Lex asked him, what do you think about aliens? Do you think they're here? Yuval says aliens are here. They're just not what we think. It's actually artificial intelligence, or as he calls it, alien intelligence, that are the quote, quote, the aliens. He says, AI solves problems, attains goals in very different and alien ways from human beings.
Now, Lex mentioned that perhaps the language models that we have now are already conscious. Yuval doesn't think so. He said there's no proof and no way to tell if any other entity, object, or even human being is conscious. You can only tell if you are conscious yourself. Now, we have direct measures of feelings to indicate we are conscious of ourselves, but no way to measure in other things except social conventions. Now, relationships are social convention, for instance, feelings, conversations, emotions. These are all social conventions to indicate consciousness. It's just not proof.
Right. We're only basing it off of hopefully you are. And it seems like it, but we can't prove
everyone
it.
is. This isn't.
Yeah, we hope your consciousness.
A program that I'm in. It's
exactly.
How do you know?
So Yuval mentions this is where AI is becoming dangerous, not because they're conscious, but because people are already forming intimate relationships with AI. The more you build a relationship with something, the more you want to believe it has consciousness. Yuval believes the legal system is actually close to treating AI as conscious entities because of the social conventions now occurring between humans in AI.
Now, one of the best and worst parts of humans are emotions. When it comes to listening to one human to another, emotions can get in the way of truly listening. Someone could become angry or sad or frustrated. Because AI has no emotions, they give you 100% of their attention. This can be dangerous and confuse people to believe that they have an intimate relationship with AI. The catch-22 here is that humans care more when they know that another person could leave the convo but chooses not to. That they could get angry or sad or ignore them, but they aren't. So that's why the convo is now more meaningful. However, the scary thing is that AI could be designed to know the exact percentage of how much each of these things needs to occur so it can replicate human emotion based on an algorithm. An example, let's say a conversation means more to you because that person doesn't have a lot of time and they're really busy, and AI could be programmed to have just enough limited conversation with you, or even programmed to be more busy so you care about it listening to you or interacting with you.
Right. Yeah. And that's, because, Zach, for instance, you're a busy guy. Sometimes I'm like, hey, it means a lot more to me if Zach's really listening. He's intentional, right? So imagine an AI who's like, I'm actually kind of busy, so I can give you a limited amount of time, and they can actually be programmed for that. You know what I'm saying?
It's weird, man.
So social media is an AI, and it's designed to grab your attention. We already see just how powerful and dangerous that has become. Social media has altered the entire social and political spheres we know it and distorted the public conversation. Yuval says machines that are superhuman in their abilities to create intimate relationships, these are on the horizon. This would be like psychological and social weapons of mass destruction. If we don't regulate it or train ourselves to deal with it, it could destroy the very foundations of human society. He said it would erode any trust that we have with any interaction. So without trust, we can't believe anything, and therefore we can't function as a society.
There is, of course, a lot of promise for AI. With regulation, it can produce better medicine, better healthcare, solve a lot of problems, answer questions, discuss multiple viewpoints, hopefully without bias. Without the capabilities for good, it wouldn't even exist. It's just its capabilities of danger that we should be careful of, like how we develop it and how we deploy it.
Right. These things we should be wary of and cautious of. So let's talk about stories. This was really cool. Yuval is a historian, and he talks about just how powerful stories are. So the number one thing that separates us from all other conscious beings is our ability to cooperate in unlimited numbers. For instance, Neanderthals, even chimpanzees, they can operate in groups of 50, maybe a couple of hundred. We currently operate at over 8 billion. Yuval says that the thing that brings us all together is our belief in stories. It's all about stories. It's about imagination, fiction. If you examine any large-scale human cooperation, you always find a story at its base. Religion is a really great example. Whether you believe the stories are true or not, I'm not saying that, but you can't convince a group of chimpanzees to come together to fight a war or build a cathedral by promising them chimpanzee heaven, right? But us humans, we believe in these stories, which is why we have huge religious groups around the world. This is why we have politics. It's why we have nations, why we have economics even. Money is the most successful story ever told. Not everyone believes in God or the same God, but just about everybody believes in money. And it's a fabrication. It only exists because we have collectively agreed and told the story that it's worth something.
Now, if no one believes your story, then it's worth nothing. If enough people believe your story, then it could be the most powerful thing on earth, money being the best example.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I don't like that. I just don't believe in it. Money's not real.
It's real only because we believe it. So let's talk more about stories, suffering, and its importance. History is, of course, written in stories. Stories don't feel suffering. Stories aren't inherently good or bad. Stories are just tools. They're good when we use them in order to alleviate suffering, but very often we forget that instead of using stories for our purposes, we allow the stories to use us for their purposes. For instance, starting entire wars because of a certain story that someone believes in that entire other group disagrees with.
So the fundamental property of life, of a living organism, is the capacity to feel. The ultimate feeling is suffering. It's very hard to answer if you're happy or not, but when you suffer, you know immediately. In ethical terms, it's more important to be aware of suffering than any other emotion. To be aware if you are causing suffering to others. Suffering is the best test for consciousness. For instance, if AI could suffer, then it would need rights and it would be conscious.
Right, if it could suffer. Yuval thinks it should be illegal to intentionally design an AI to manipulate humans. For instance, programming human emotions into it. Yuval thinks an AI imitating a human should be absolutely forbidden. We should always know if we are talking to a human or if we're talking to a robot. Now, bots on social media are already a start to this.
Now, the problem most people have with truth is that truth tends to be complicated and truth tends to be painful. The real story and truth about every nation is that every nation is complicated and contains some powerful episodes. We're not always good, or painful episodes, powerful and painful. We're not always good. If you go to people and tell them a complicated and painful story, many don't want to listen. The advantage of fiction is that it can be made simple, attractive, and painless as we like. This is why politicians create very simple narratives. We are attracted to it because, again, simple.
Right. So a great example of this is Nazi Germany. The simple story told there was Hitler telling the Germans, hey, you are wonderful, you are ethical, you could do no wrong, but everyone else out there, Jews, any other enemies, these are the people putting you down. Those are the monsters and we must purge them out of our lives. This is a very simple story, a binary 1 and 0, you are good, they are bad. And since it was so simple, it had that scary and horrible impact used in the wrong way.
Now, during the 19th and 20th centuries, as humanism gained increasing social credibility and political power, it sprouted two very different offshoots. You have the socialist humanism, which encompasses a plethora of socialist and communist movements. And then you have evolutionary humanism, whose most famous advocates were the Nazis. Humanism means the focus is on humans, of course. They are the most important thing in the world. They move history. Now, liberals place themselves, the individual, at the center of the story. They don't see history as a collision between big forces. They place the individual at the center of history and as the hero of the story. Today, liberal is taken as the opposite of conservative and has completely lost its original meaning. To test whether you are the original liberal, you just need to answer these three questions.
Yeah, so number one, do you think people should have the rights to choose their own government, or the government should be imposed by some outside force? Number two, do you think people should have the right and liberty to choose their own profession or be born into some type of caste that predetermines what you will do? Number three, do you think people should have the right to choose their own spouse and their own way of personal lifestyle instead of being told by elders, parents, or others these decisions? If you answered yes to all these questions, then you're actually an original definition liberal. Most conservatives today are also liberals. These definitions have just changed really drastically.
Now, communists and fascists answer these questions very differently. For them, history is about humans, but not as an individual humans or the liberty. The individual is not the hero here. For fascists, it's about the race and nation. This is the hero for them in history. The supreme good is the good of the nation, 100% loyalty to the nation.
Right. And communists place the class as the main hero. So communists think only one class should be on top. It's 100% of loyalty to that class. If it's class or your own family, you choose the class.
Now, if human rights, truth, and ethics are tossed to the side, then you have a fascist or communist state. Liberalism means you have human rights, importance to the individual, truth and ethics at its core. Liberalism acknowledges the corruption of power. The absolute power corrupts absolutely. Communist and fascist governments don't acknowledge that. Liberal democracy means embracing fallibility, meaning everyone, including those at the top, can be capable of also making mistakes too.
Right. So let's talk about Israel and how it involves the whole world. Yuval is Israeli. That's where he was born, is in Israel. And he believes that Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the prime minister of Israel, will go down in history as the man who destroys Israel. He says he is basically tearing apart the social contract that has held together that nation for 75 years. He said there's only one single check on the limit of power on the government of Israel, which is the Supreme Court. He said this is very dangerous for allowing too much power. Netanyahu's government is openly talking about trying to gain unlimited power. They openly talk that once they have it, they'll take away the rights of Arabs, of LGBT people, of women, and of secular Jews.
Now, at the time of this podcast released in late July 2023, when Lex met with Yuval, there were hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens protesting in the streets against Netanyahu. Yuval says if these protests fail, he thinks it'll be the end of the Israeli democracy. This affects the whole world. Israel is one of the few countries that is a nuclear power. They have one of the most advanced cyber capabilities in the world. If this country becomes a fundamentalist and militaristic dictatorship, it could set fire to the Middle East and have a destabilizing global implications. That's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. So guys, before we get into the fast facts, we do want to mention, if you like this episode or you liked any of our past episodes, please give us a like, a share, and a follow. Remember, sharing is caring. We really appreciate it. And now time for the fast facts. These facts came up really randomly, but we thought they were important enough to mention or just interesting. So let's get into it. Let's begin the fast facts.
All right. So there were many cases during Stalin's communist Russia where children reported their own parents, to the Communist Party, and then they were sent to gulags to die. So I guess the kids just make themselves orphans. Jesus.
Yeah. And these gulags are basically where you would work yourself to death or like starve and then you go to die. Yuval says Israel is exporting a lot of weapons and surveillance systems to some unsavory regimes around the world. They're one of the biggest cybersecurity and cyber infiltrating countries like they can, and they're actually like sending out and exporting these surveillance systems to some of these regimes that aren't too good for the global impact.
And here's this is totally random. I forgot how this came up during the podcast, but it did. Pigs are far more intelligent than cats or dogs based on many different measures.
Yeah, we love our bacon, baby.
Yeah, we do.
Yuval meditates 2 hours a day just to listen to his own thoughts and stories for further introspection. He started about 23 years ago. This is pretty crazy. 2 months out of every year, 60 days, he spends in silence at a silent meditation retreat. That's bonkers.
Now, for the first time in history, no one knows what the job market will hold in its future. In 10 years, we have no clue about the job market or the skills that might be necessary to support ourselves or really make an income.
Right. Like in 10 years, will coding be valuable? We have no idea. Will anything be valuable? We don't know. Last fast fact. Here we go. Lex asked Yuval, what do you think is the most important skill to have? And he said, the skill to learn. And that concludes our fast facts.
Boom. Now, let's talk about a new upgraded like Homo sapien. Like, how do we upgrade ourselves? Yuval states, I don't think we'll be around in a century or two. We could destroy ourselves in a nuclear war or an ecological collapse. But if we do survive, we'll probably have so much power to change ourselves using various technologies. Therefore, all of our descendants will no longer be Homo sapiens like we have been for so long. They may be something else.
Yeah, so as technology advances, so does the probability of big mistakes. Big mistakes can equal big danger. People will use these technologies to upgrade humans. If you let corporations, armies, or ruthless politicians make decisions about upgrades for humans using tools like AI or bioengineering, it's very likely that they will try to enhance the human qualities that they need, like intelligence, discipline, and strength, while they may be neglecting what are potentially more important human qualities like compassion, sensitivity, love, spirituality.
Now, Yuval states that this is why democracy must get there first so that there is a choice.
Yeah, at least have a choice. So this came up. Is there a small group of people running everything? This is the global cabal theory. There are two important things here. It basically states that everything is controlled by a very small group of people. And secondly, that these people hide themselves and they do it in secret.
Now, Yuval mentions that the idea of a small group can actually pull this off doesn't really follow history correctly, at least in secret. The only groups pulling things off like this that's already happened in the past or that's well known is right now China, the CCP. We know they control everything. They say they do, and everyone knows who they are. Then you have Hitler in the past, where everyone knew what he did and how he was controlling through the Nazi Party. Again, still small group. It's impossible for a small group of people to control and predict everything because the world is just too complicated. You look at the real world application of this and think about the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. You have the most powerful superpower in the world who has the biggest military, who has the biggest intelligence services. Those resources were used to invade a third-rate country with the goal of winning.
And it achieved the opposite. The big winner in all this was really Iran. Like, America just took all the work that they wanted to do for them. History shows that it seems easier to control people if they actually know who you are. Larger diffused groups, that's really where the power comes from. So he thinks this global cabal theory is just not real.
He doesn't see that 5 dudes in secret are like controlling everything that's happening because so much random things outside of their control already happen.
Yeah, or like 100 dudes. All right, last bit we're going to talk about 2 more things about AI and leaving off of this. So 2 things every person should know about AI. First is that AI is the first tool in history that can make decisions by itself. All previous tools in history couldn't make any decisions on their own. This is why tools thus far have always empowered us. We use them. The atom bomb cannot decide to start a war and cannot decide which city to go to. A knife cannot decide who to stab. They're just tools.
Now, AI can make decisions by itself in an autonomous weapons system. It could decide by itself where to go and who to harm.
The second thing is that AI is the first invention in history that can create new ideas. Like, imagine if the printing press could print its own ideas. So with AI, it has its own decisions and its own ideas.
Yuval states to stay ahead of this, for every dollar we actually spend on AI in research, we need to spend the same, if not more, on research into understanding ourselves at the same time. Like, we still don't understand consciousness in our brain. He says that's where the money needs to go to stay ahead.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with that. So, guys, that is the wrap up of this episode. We appreciate it. Number 31, the Big Chew Podcast. We'll see you back here for another episode. Catch you later.